Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Delores Sullivan. Looking forward to our conversation, Delores. Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So Delores is a birth mum, and she's also a therapist. And we spoke about a month or so ago, and something towards the end of our conversation, we got to something really juicy, I think, which is the being at peace with the lack of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Being at peace with the lack of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that would be a great place to kick off. So did I say that? Did you say that? Do you remember? Is a month?
I never know. I'm thinking that maybe you said it out of something I said.
Yeah.
And we said it together, sort of. Yeah.
Because this is a big transformation in your life. You talked about how you felt that at one point you felt that it was a life sentence to feel bad about placing your son, right?
Yes, I would say it was an imposed life sentence because it took me a long time to realize that I didn't have to live it like a life sentence, because part of that whole scenario of guilt and shame kept me sort of locked up, like as in a sentence. So as I pulled out of that and did a lot of my own work, I was able to realize that I had the keys to let myself out of the prison.
Yeah. I love that metaphor. And to continue the metaphor, what do you think the prison was made of?
I think it was a combination of just issues that got me into the pregnancy and relinquishment surrounding my own family of origin, there was some trauma there. There was a lot of good too, but there was trauma. And then that poured into the shaming and restricting experience of being in the maternity home. So the institutional shaming, the societal shaming, the religious shaming, the familial shaming, sort of coalesced around the trauma. And then from that, it just sort of put me in a box of, you can't get out of here. This is you. This is how your life is going to be narrated. Although I wouldn't use that word at the time, but it was like something that I was never going to get past.
Yeah. Have you ever come across a guy called David Hawkins? So one of his big works was called Power versus Force.
No, I guess I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah. So he was a therapist. He was I think he was a preacher as well of some sorts, a religious guy of some sorts. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he used he came up with a scale of human consciousness that goes from 0 to 1,000. And I don't know why it really didn't take off, because it came up with it in the 70s, and it 0 is dead. Unconditional love, I think, is 350. That we were talking. You were commenting on my dog pillows before we started recording. He even calibrated the level of consciousness of a dog's wagging tail. Right? And I can't remember what it was, but let's say it was 250 or something like that. But so 0 is dead, but the next one up from 0 is shame at 20. So I think anger's maybe 50, something like that. Pride is 180, and then beyond 200 we get life affirming levels of consciousness. But for me, the fact that shame is down there right at the bottom at almost death, and we think about unfortunately we think about people within the adoption constellation that have committed suicide, right? So 0 is dead, shame is 20. Shame is kind of, as you say, all encompassing, really, and coalescing. And this book, this Power versus Force book, I mention it quite often on the podcast, so sorry listeners if you've heard this before, but looking at that level of consciousness is a great way for to see a plan or a roadmap or a ladder, which is, it starts with that freedom. So can you remind me when because shame at the time that you placed your son, this was a while ago, could you tell us when? Was it 60s, 50s?
Well, it was in 68. I relinquished him 2 days before my 17th birthday in 1968.
Yeah.
But I would say the shame started way before that.
Yeah.
And in my own sense of being a young woman that was interested in sex and the healthy experience of sex, and having it not be okay, and trying to submerge that, and then added the layer of getting pregnant, which, as we've all talked about, was so unforgivable. And then the shaming experience that starts so early, whether it's going to the doctor and how they look at you and talk to you, and then on into my going to a different school, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
So it was so embedded. The shame was so embedded in layer by layer by layer.
Yeah, and clearly, I was placed for adoption in 67, so I have some idea of the societal norms there. But they obviously they've shifted a long way since.
Oh yes.
Since then, like somebody, I heard the other day that in the UK, only 1% of the adoptions that we have,
yes,
right now are voluntary adoptions.
Yes, yes.
99% of them are state initiated. So it's a court, it's a judge or a series of judges. We've moved so far from those days, and that's why, when I read a few birth mothers' biographies, and they go into great depths of capturing that 60s shame stuff, especially as you say, in the doctor's surgeries, and in the mother and babies' homes. They just went. You were kind of drenched in shame, it seemed to me.
Well, that was a form of discipline, so to speak. I mean, it was a way to keep us all in control,
Yeah.
And like everything had a shame-based theme to it. I'm sure they wouldn't have used the language so much, except maybe in some of the religious services, but it was always there, whether it was a look or a frown or a sigh, or, well, you got yourself in this situation. That kind of language, helped really keep us all in control.
Yeah.
And they were terrified of us being out of control, because they saw us as out of control people already when we entered, because we'd broken all the rules,
Yeah. Wow. Was it a religious home that you were in?
Well, I was in a Salvation Army home, the White Shield Salvation Army, but they had a religious theme to it for sure. And we had to pray before and after each meal. And we also had to go to church on Sunday and again on Wednesday night. and we weren't allowed to do anything that was considered much fun. Not that there was a lot of fun in the maternity home, but on Sunday, that was a sacred day that you were supposed to just rest and be prayerful, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it certainly had the religious themes and all that.
And did they put a religious theme to the shame? Did they talk about this being against God and stuff like that?
Yes, they would, in the prayers we had, they would talk about, please ask God to help you, forgive you for what you've done. And your one way to atone it is to give up your child. I mean, that was a theme within the prayer theme. And then I remember they had a woman come and talk about how she'd had this awful life and had used a lot of drugs and everything, which really was quite counter to the rest of us in there. We were all kind of pretty innocent kind of teenagers. So I remember we were just shocked by it, but then they kind of finished that sermon with, we were just like her, and we were going to go the wrong way. I think she'd been in jail or something. And so it was all to somehow control us, and it was pervasive,
it was laid on really thick. Really thick.
Yes.
Really thick. And because the religious, the church was playing both sides, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yes.
It was shaming the kids, shaming the birth mothers. But it was into relinquishment, but it was also it was managing the transaction, wasn't it? It was taking money off the couples in the congregation that couldn't have their own kids or wanted. So money was being changed hands even within the church. This was all going to church funds to do it. This is,
it's very compelling to be shamed to relinquish. It worked, right? I'm not going to be a good mother. I'm not good for this child. So I better give them up, And so it was very beneficial to them because they had a financial transaction that they could fulfill.
Yes. So it's different here in the UK because money doesn't change hands for adoption in the UK.
Okay, gotcha.
Adoptive parents may pay some court fees, or a small amount of money, so like 3 figures, perhaps not. So even though the church will, I'm sure, laid on loads of guilt, it wasn't getting money. They weren't getting money for transaction. I don't know whether they might have been saying a donation on the side. Do you know what I mean? They might have been doing some kind of stealth stuff.
Might have.
But I do remember being to Rome a few times in my life. I love Rome, but we went to St. Peter's, the church, and our friends wanted to go in, so we went into the Vatican, and I saw some people queuing up to. First, I saw this huge church and this fantastic ceiling and all. We didn't go to the Sistine Chapel or anything, but I just thought this has come from collections from people. That's what's funded it, and probably adoption stuff funds. That's what has been kicked up. Like the mafia do that, The mafia everybody has to kick up, to the made man. So everything's. So anyway, we won't get into that. So you talked about a jail, and I guess in one word, the jail is shame, right?
Well, but the institution felt like a jail.
The institution
we were in, there were all these rules. You couldn't watch TV except for a certain hour. You couldn't go. You had to be in bed at a certain time, up a certain. You could only have visitors a certain time. There was just such rigid rules around it, and just strange rules, like you were never allowed to nap. And I always thought, and I was so anemic, I was severely anemic, and I had an abscess too, and I was so tired. But if you were caught napping, you were punished by removing your privileges of going somewhere on Sunday or having a visitor or being able to watch the movie that night, So it was all to kind of control, I always say to control our sexuality and our fecundity. It was a way to manage all of us. And it was effective in that sense. And I worked really hard and quite creatively, by the way, to work around it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where that came out of me. There was some part, it was like I was on two tracks. I had the shame and awful person that I was experiencing, that I was so bad. And then this other part that, oh, well, I'm going to take advantage of this situation and figure out how to live around it. And I actually did manage my own little ways of not being caught in it. I don't know where that came from. I was so young, but
I'm glad it did. It's your cheeky spirit. I can see it, cheeky grin right now.
Well, I always had a sunny personality and a deep resilience. So I think when I came to this experience, I utilized that the best way I could be. And I offered to do things like be the person that greeted all the new girls and gave them the tour. And I talked them into letting me have a room, because most of us were in large rooms. And I talked them into letting me have actually was a closet with a window to have as my room. And then I talked them into let me have a bed from the basement. And, I was being very creative. And then my whole walls were all covered with fashion models out of magazines, which people just thought I'd lost. What are you doing that for? You're like in a journey home, you're going to have a baby. Why you got fashion models? But see, I had to dream. I needed to dream, because to not dream was to die in my soul somehow in there. So I had this little world in that closet.
And you became a model, didn't you?
Yes, and I later became a model, was in the fashion business 15 years, so I had to figure out how to survive there. They had a little tiny library. I read every book. I didn't even care what the subject. I just started reading because I thought, well, I'm here for 120 days. I better just make the best of it, So I learned to be really creative. And I think, if you don't mind me telling this, the thing I'm most proud of is they had a rule that you could never sew on Sunday afternoon. It was like a sin. And the way they enforced it is they took the controls to the sewing machine and they locked them in a cabinet. And so I knew where the cabinet was, and I knew that if I went down and talked to the woman at the front desk about her children that were in the photo in the background, she would lean over and leave the door open, and I could get the second control to the machines. So I just slipped them in my pocket. And then on Sunday, when everybody was napping, I'd tiptoe down the hall and I'd sew beautiful clothes for when I got out.
Yeah.
But that was my survival. Do you understand? It was like, boy, this is bad, but I'm going to figure out a way to get out of here, And then I put it back before they never figured it out. I discreetly put it back in the locked cabinet. No one ever caught me. They never caught me doing it. But it was like my escape, that I could sew and make clothes for myself, because someone donated fabric all the time, just donated. So I just go in and pick through it and make my own clothes, without a pattern.
Fantastic. Good on you. So your son was marinated in the womb. He was kind of marinated with some sunny disposition and a bit of shame as well. Then was he? I mean,
oh yes, yeah, oh yeah. My heartache has always been that his life did not fare as well as mine did after relinquishment, and I couldn't have seen that at the time. I thought that, that I was doing the best thing. Well, actually, it was the only thing. I didn't really have any other choice. And I had thought he was going to go to a high income family that would send him to the elite schools, and he'd lived this life of polish. And when I later found out 28 years later that wasn't the case, then I really had tremendous guilt and shame about the fact that his life did not fare as well as mine, because my intent was for both of us to thrive. That was really, I remember being consciously thinking, what is the best thing to do here? I'm not done with high school, and he needs a good home. I don't have any money. I don't want to be on welfare. I was really trying to figure out the best option. And they sold me such a great story about where he was going. And it was just going to be fabulous, And it wasn't any of those things. It was not at all that. So I had a certain comfort for 28 years that, well, at least he got a really good life, and the people really were mature, and they sent him to good school. I had all this fantasy, and it was just heartbreaking when I realized that none of that was true.
Yeah.
So
what we talked earlier on about peace with the lack of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still feel that way too? They've obviously very coercive propaganda. They've misled you. You
Mm-hmm.
found out that it's all been a pack of lies,
mm-hmm.
and then the shame comes back at you this time with
Mm-hmm.
like a vengeance, like it's
Yeah.
on steroids now.
Yes.
So what was the how's the journey been since then? Because that's like 30 years ago. I'm 56. Your son
72. I'm 72.
I didn't say that.
No, I thought you
I
were
didn't
doing
ask that.
that.
I was going to work it out on your sons.
Oh, my son. Well, see, we've been in reunion since 95. So I found him in 95. I found him. Yeah. So go ahead. You were going to ask me something.
I was going to ask you. So what you've got this? You found out the truth. That you've been misled. The turbocharged shames come right back at you because you've realised you've been sold a duff story. What happened next? What was the next opening? I guess finding him, was it?
Yes, I spent 14 years looking for him, and then I found him in September of 95. So right up to the minute and actually even when I first met him, I thought, he's doing pretty good, but as we got farther in reunion, I realized how troubled he was. And as the story unfolded about his life, then I realized, oh boy, this is really bad. And I think that guilt really, it was overwhelming. I could not manage it, because then I felt that sense of agency that, 16 or not, no lawyer, no parent, no advice, nothing. I still made a decision to relinquish him, even though I had good intentions. And it set his life on a trajectory that was not good. And so that just hit me really hard, and I really dysfunctioned for a good 4 or 5 years after finding him. So that was that peace and not peace. Peaceful, I found him, not at peace because of the truth.
Yeah.
And it was really hard on both of us, really hard.
Yeah. But something about your resilience got you through.
Yes. Well, and I thought, okay, I'm going to bring him back into my family system, my current one. And I had a nice husband and other children, and we're just going to envelop him with love. And, it's just going to be great. I bought him a new Jeep. I was just doing all this stuff to make up for it. But he was too troubled. In fact, the more he realized what he lost, the more mad he became. It was really hard for him. And it wasn't because I was the birth mother he had imagined. They told him, that actually told him that I was on drugs and I'd had a terrible life. I was a street person. It was that I wasn't that person. And then he'd lost all this life with me. And it really hit him in deep rage. He was just full of rage about it. And I took the rage because I was so ashamed and so culpable for having the decision. And so I wrestled for years with my own sense of responsibility about that and tried to fix it and fix it and fix it, you know. So now I see it completely different. But then for many years, it was just really painful.
Yeah. Because it was lies all around. He'd been told a bunch of lies too.
Yeah, totally told a bunch of lies.
Yeah.
And really saw the good life I had lived that he didn't get.
Yeah.
And we both regressed. You know, he went back to sort of emotionally age 3 or 4, and I went back to 15 or 16, you know, and so we really, that's where it was so hard until I was able to really a lot of support by a birth mom therapist, actually, who helped me out of it. But it took a long time, a long time.
So what were the things that started to click for you over that long journey back to?
I think several things. Really good on therapy. I had lots of good therapy. I had people that loved me a lot, that really supported me. And at that time, he's deceased now, but my husband at that time was a lovely man. He really stepped in to be my son's father, so to speak, stepfather. And we really, you know, he loved me so deeply. Now, I wouldn't say that I loved myself too much during that time. I was really mad at myself for what had happened. But I had enough people around me that loved me. And then, of course, meeting other birth moms and going to conferences and reading, all that together helped me come out the other side of it.
Yeah. Were there any particular sort of turnaround moments in that time?
I think when I got involved in legislation for adoptees' rights, I tried to get a bill passed in the Senate, and then the House had never made it to committee, and then I got involved in the Measure 58 in Oregon, and I used the anger and pain that I had experienced to activate my work. And the more I told my story, the more it was out there. And the more I felt like I could do something about what had happened, at least for the records, if nothing else. That helped me feel more empowered and like I'd somehow done some type of reparation. Yeah. So it was a key piece.
So I was chatting to an adoptee on the show about advocacy work, and she was here in the UK. And she said that when she'd been doing some work with politicians, and when she said that if you're in the inner circle, if you are a fellow politician, then anger is permissible. But anybody that comes in from the outside, showing any displays of anger is basically cancelled, is basically shut out. Is that different in the States, or were you kind of like holding your anger back, just using it as a tool to push you forward, or what did that look like for you?
I tried to use mine in a more productive way. I was feeling it. I could feel it all the way from my toes up top of my head when I'd be talking to senators and trying to tell them my story and why it was important to open records and what had happened. But my power within that anger was to be very strategic about how I told my story and who I told it to, for it to be effective. So I was able to take the anger and keep it somewhat submerged so that I could effectively bring about change. And so, but it would get activated when I learned more about, I went back to the home and I went back to the adoption agency and all that. And then it'd get activated, and then I'd have to think, okay, I need to be effective, not mad all the time. But I think depression was the default, or the other way around, the anger for the depression. And I would just have these tremendous sad periods, and then I'd come out of them, and it would be rolling. It'd kind of be this rolling sadness that stayed with me a really long time.
Yeah. So when did you become a therapist? When, because you had
25 years ago.
25 years ago.
Yeah. And this propelled me to become a therapist. Actually, I'd been in therapy with someone who told me that my issue about birth parents was not a real reason. There was no reason. It had nothing related to my depression, and that they weren't going to talk about it. And that I was really wrong to be doing anything with the law. And that so angered me. That doesn't, I'm going to become a therapist.
Yeah.
It just like, that doesn't, I'm going back to school. I'm going to become a therapist because this is just not true, So actually the work got me to become a therapist. So
yeah. The work, the advocacy work was the spring.
Yeah. And then I met a lot of other therapists, and Betty Jean Lifton and Annette Barron and all the other people that were active, Joyce Pavo, and they became my mentors for getting into school and figuring out how to be really good. I just had great teachers about the work,
Yeah.
So
Joyce has been on the show. She's a great
oh yeah.
She's a great lady. She's a great lady. So yeah, I'm putting the timelines together. So you became a therapist 25 years ago. So that's what, 98. 95 was on the reunion. So this must have been a really busy time of your life.
Yes. And I was lost for a while there, lost in what I was going to do with my life. I just didn't think I was very lovable. I didn't think I could ever be forgiven. And again, that was that life sentence, and that I had to pay it forever. And so there was lots of periods there in that middle time before. As I got in school, I got more focused and was able to sort of be learning about what was happening to me. But there was a long period where I just felt like this was something I was never going to get out of, that there was not going to be any forgiveness. And I hadn't really thought of forgiving myself. See, that's what came later.
Yeah.
Forgiving
yourself.
Yes. Because once I was able to embrace that it was my 16-year-old self that had made terrible choice. She had to make a terrible choice with no support. Nobody was talking to me. No one was, giving me any kind of advice. That I just really learned to love her for her courage and her grit and her trying to sort out, okay, now maybe if I do this, that'll be better than if I do this. And, by myself. Which just, I look back now, and every time I see a 16-year-old, I'm like, oh, gee, that's so young, But I've learned, once I was able to love her and have compassion for her, then the guilt started going away. And I think there's healthy shame, things we should feel bad about, but then there's that awful toxic shame that we don't benefit from. So I was beginning to accept what had happened and realize that I'd done them really in the old, we've heard this phrase before, but I did the best I could with the situation in front of me,
Yeah. But getting that intellectually and getting that in your bones are completely different things.
That's right.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment when you got it in your bones, when the penny dropped for you on this stuff?
I think once I realized that my story could be helpful to others, and like when my life story came out in Rolling Stone, and they got all these articles just poured in about how much it meant to them to read about this, all the adoptees and birth parents, but they heard from a lot of adoptees. Then I realized, wow, maybe my story has meaning somehow. Maybe there's a reason I'm in this point in time and I had this experience. And also when I saw all the young adoptees trying to get their birth certificates the day after the law passed, they were all there. It was just packed at the Department of Vital Statistics. So many wanted it. And I thought, okay, there can be good come from my experience. Yeah. And if I keep teaching and supporting and helping people from my story, then some good can be had.
Have you heard of a guy called Robert Dilts? You heard of him? He's a psychologist. Robert Dilts. I think it's D-I-L-T-S. Dilts.
Not sure if I remember that name.
Yeah, he's got a model, and it's a bit like an Ansof's matrix. No, I've forgotten the name of the therapist now. Maslow, sorry, it's a bit like the Maslow's pyramid, the hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Which at the top it's got self-actualization, if I remember from my psychology lessons back in the day. But the Robert Dilts model, he's got I think meaning is his top of the pyramid. So when our story, when we realize that we've been through for a reason.
Yeah.
Like when the penny dropped, when the penny dropped for you on that. Do you work with your work with clients? Is that ever a thing for them?
Yeah, when I first started practicing, I worked with much more adult adoptees and birth parents. Now I'm in a different place. I'm at the coast, and it's more generalist practice. But I had support groups, and I had a lot when I was living and working in Portland, and I set up several teaching seminars for doctors, actually, to train them and nurses about relinquishment and adoption and how it affects. So now it more that people filter in that just happen to mention at the end of their intake paperwork, oh, by the way, I'm adopted, But over the years, I had a lot. I was much more active in my first 10 years, I'd say, of practice, of a lot of people coming to me because they knew about my work.
Yeah.
But
and did that meaning thing give meaning to them, to your clients?
Yes, yeah, that they, I think in particular, when a birth mom meets another birth mom, boy, there can be so much healing there, because we're told not to talk to each other, not socialize. So particularly when I meet in a birth mom, but then also when I worked with adoptees and they're talking about they're trying to find their birth mom or whatever, and then I let them know, depending on the circumstance, disclose that I'm a birth mother. That really helps them see that there's a human person behind what happened to them. And so it opens up a lot of conversation that maybe they wouldn't have had with someone who wasn't in the constellation, the adoption constellation.
And presumably it's proof that it's not a life sentence, right, as well?
I know. One of the things I've worked hard in my work, particularly with birth mothers, is to let go of that thing, that this is something you got to be burdened with your whole life. It is what it is. There was a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have happened, that were wrong. And certainly I always say that within the triad, the adoptee got the worst deal, for sure. They lost their family of origin, they lost their connection, they lost all so much. So we have a responsibility as the birth parent to provide that understanding and explanation and information, but it can't be something that we carry forever, or else everybody's burden. We'll never get out of it. But also, I will say that even with that, my son and I will forever have a trauma bond between us. It's not the same as with my other children. It just is never going to be the same, because he lost all those years. And so it's good when I see him with his siblings, because they really enjoy him and have a good relationship, and they are able to bridge. But he and I will always have something that we can't quite cross through, because we were separated in a traumatic way. And I always felt if he could do some of his own therapy, it would help him, but that hasn't happened.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question on that, but you've
Yeah.
Is it, this isn't, I don't know, I'm going to ask you anyway. I mean, can you take the therapist's hat off and put the mum hat on?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, in fact, now that you said that, I just wanted to share this with you. When I saw him just 2 months ago, he was visiting with one of his brothers, my middle son, and we had the baby, his new baby. And there was a moment when we were just alone in the room, and I was holding the baby, and I could feel his pain, that I had never held him like that at that age. I held him right after birth, and it was palpable. The energy was palpable. And that he was seeing me mother my grandson in a way he'd never been mothered. And he just got up, went in the other room, and I realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to bridge this with him, because as it is, we're really taking baby steps to come back together after a long estrangement. So I didn't talk to him about it. But I also felt that the pain is still there. He still feels it. And I just don't think it's going to leave him. It's too enormous of a loss. So when I can be there, when his siblings can be there, when we can support him, and he has sons of his own now, and I send them little animals and cards and stuff, I think that helps. But there is a part of him that's remote from me, and he can't reach it, and I can't fix it. Now, see, I used to think I could fix it, but I can't fix it.
Are you at peace with the unfixability?
I am now, but it doesn't haunt me anymore. I do think that I took what I couldn't repair with him and what happened into my work. And every time I can help somebody, whether they're an adoptee or not, I feel like I'm bringing good into the world. I'm sending out something good to help someone else. And so that is my way of sort of making peace with what happened. I think when I look at his life and my life, that somehow this was the destiny, the sad destiny of what happened for both of us. And so I don't feel there's a benefit for me to be chronically guilty or ashamed of that in relationship to him. It isn't healthy. It keeps him trapped and it keeps me trapped. And he needs to address that at some point in his own way. I don't think he will, but he has a great wife. He has adorable little boys. So he is stable and does have his own family now. So
So it kind of leads me onto a question about, like, I'm really interested in insights and big shifts in belief. So, did I tell you about the letter from my birth mum? Did I tell you about that?
Yes, a little bit, but tell me more.
Yeah. So when I got my adoption file, which is about 8 years or so ago, there was this letter in there from my birth mum to the social worker who had worked on the placement, thanking her for her help at the on the day of handover. So when I was 5 weeks old, so February 1967, and the word that you talked earlier on was about control. Like in the mother and baby's home, the Salvation Army. What do you say? The White Sisters. What was it called? The Salvation Army was called.
White Shield, Salvation
White
Army.
Shield. Yeah, the White Shield. Yeah. You talked about control. And a massive inequality of control. And reading this letter from my birth mother, which she was begging the social worker to get my mum and dad, to ask my mum and dad if they'd give her this, if they'd accept this teddy bear for.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And reading the letter, I saw her utter powerlessness. Pat's utter powerlessness.
Yeah.
I saw the power, the inequality of power. I felt the desperation of her predicament, and I felt her love for me, and that this teddy bear was a consolation prize. Sorry, the teddy bear that I at one moment in my life felt like a consolation prize was a symbol of her love. And like when you're talking about buying animals for your sons,
yes,
like that hit me. As you,
it would.
And I just, and I remember just crying buckets for the 40 seconds of anger and fear that I'd had in my life towards my mother. And it seems to me that the biggest moments for me come with that emotional tumultuous, I think is the word. I don't use the word before, but it's like a real it's a dip. It's a profound trough, but it leads to break. What do people say? Break down to break through.
Yeah,
something like that. And that's what happens if we keep on going. Like it took you 14 years. To find him. So if we keep on going and we are don't let our fear stop us, then that's how I kind of see us having these breakthroughs. And I'm just wondering what your take on all this as a therapist, and clearly very loving mum, is. Oh, you could talk into that. I've shared my experience, but is there something that you can say to the listeners that kind of wraps that up? Is there anything?
If I can talk about that feeling?
Could you talk? I've talked about my kind of theory, if you like, my pet
Mhm.
theory on insights and breaking down to break through and all
Yeah.
this stuff, and we keep going. I'm just wondering if you could put a more general take on that might benefit the listeners.
I think that there has to be some type of ability, and of course I recommend with good therapy, with a therapist that knows how to do trauma work particularly, to get the story out of loss, of pain, of heartache, of disappointment, of the profound effects of relinquishment before the adoption, and really be able to empower the adoptee in particular to tell the story, have the story heard, have it compassionately cared about, and then help them find a way to make sense of what it means now, so that they can eventually let the story go and not have it hold them hostage forever. Because it's like any other work, that we do, to be able to take the things that have harmed us, hurt us, been painful, grief, losing someone special. Only this is such a big life event, to lose your family of origin and lose the smell of your mom, the sense of your mom, the parenting. So I think if we can move actually all parties in adoption from victim to survivor of it, just like we do with any other trauma, and help that by unpacking it and then stabilizing their own life. I always do body work and that kind of stuff to help people stabilize the trauma in their body, and then be able to let it go, that's part of what the story is. But the story has to be heard first. They have to have a voice for it. They have to give voice to it, and not be repressed in telling it and sharing in the heartache of it. And I do think sibling reunions can be quite healing, that it helps the adoptee have some connection to the family of origin. And of course, I think all of us should be able to find who our biological parents are, whatever the relationship is, to help begin to make sense of what we did and didn't get, or they didn't get. But we all know that's not easy. Reunion's not easy. It's very difficult, So I think giving voice to the story, helping it have meaning, and putting it in the context of the rest of their life, and then at some point letting it go so they can live forward. That's what Betty Jean Lifton said. We must all live forward. And I think she's right. She was absolutely right about that.
Yeah. Can I take you back on something that you said a couple of minutes ago about stabilizing the trauma in the body?
Yeah. Well, when I work with trauma, I have my three-prong approach. One is, let's stabilize everything. And I'm talking basic functioning: sleeping, eating, exercise, meaningful prayer, whatever practice you have. Just getting the body stable and healthier, because usually it's so activated when people have trauma they haven't done anything about. So learning self-care and that real basic functioning that sometimes people, what do you mean self-care? I do self-care, don't I? They don't even know what that means, but it's a caring of self. Then get that kind of layered down as a foundation. Then we begin the processing of the story, so that it can come out of at least physiologically stable place. And then let the story come wherever, little pieces or big pieces, let it flow out. And then third part is, how do we live forward with what we know now? So that's how I like to work with trauma. It just, you need to have the body stable, because all the stress hormones that have been flooded in all our bodies when we've had this, early injury is there.
Yeah. So you mean stabilizing the body? Yeah. Okay.
Stabilizing the body, which stabilizes the brain, which, it just all does it, but often people don't even know what that's like. They've lived out of a reactive life, or they lived out of the trauma and the pain, and they don't know how And that's why, of course, you see a lot of adoptees with alcohol and drug problems and, a lot of issues because they around that emotionality that can't be regulated because they've never taken care of themselves because they thought they weren't worth of being taken care of. No one took care of me, so why should I take care of myself? So I always start with that. Let's get you grounded. Let's get you grounded is basically it. Yeah.
So fascinating discussion. I'm conscious of time. Is there something that I've not asked you about that you'd like to share with the adoptees listening?
I think just that being able to have the courage to recognize that for whatever reason, this is how their life began, but there's much more hope in how their life can continue and go forward. And that if they look for that and they allow themselves to recognize their own goodness, their own ability to be loving to themselves and to others, there can be great healing. I'm very optimistic about all that. And so rather than keep everybody down and we're angry and we're mad and it ain't going to work and all that negativity, I really believe there's much more hope. We're talking about it now. We never talked about it. We have therapists specializing in it now. We have podcasts, we have books, we have leaders in it. And listening to something like this, if it can even do one thing to help someone have more hope, the hope is there. It's possible to overcome the pain of it all.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Delores.
Thank you for having me. What a treat.
Yeah, I love connecting with both of them.
Okay.
Thank you, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Goodbye.